Rain lashed against the windshield of Ellie Morgan's 15-year-old Honda Civic as she squinted through the downpour. The rural highway stretched before her, a dark ribbon glistening in her headlights. It was nearly midnight and she was still 2 hours from home. The nursing shift she had just completed, a grueling 12-hour ordeal at County Memorial, had left her bone-tired. But she couldn't afford to stop. Her rent was due in 3 days, and she needed every hour of overtime she could get. At 32, Ellie wasn't where she had imagined she would be at this point in her life. The nursing degree had taken longer than expected, delayed by her mother's illness and the need to work full-time while studying. By the time she graduated, she was already saddled with student loan debt that seemed to grow rather than shrink, despite her consistent payments. The small apartment she shared with her cat Milo consumed nearly half her monthly income, and what remained barely covered utilities, groceries, and the minimum payments on her loans. But Ellie had always been a fighter. Growing up in foster care after losing both parents in a car accident at age 8 had taught her resilience. She had clawed her way through nursing school because she believed in a simple truth: helping others was the surest path to finding meaning in one's own life. So she worked the overnight shifts no one else wanted, cared for the most difficult patients with unwavering patience, and drove the long commute to the hospital that paid slightly better than those closer to her apartment. Just 2 more hours, she thought, fighting back a yawn as she adjusted the radio volume. The late-night talk show was discussing global politics. Something about tensions in Eastern Europe and rumors of covert military operations. Ellie turned it down slightly, more interested in staying awake than absorbing the details of international diplomacy. The first sign of trouble came as a flash of hazard lights through the curtain of rain. A vehicle was pulled onto the narrow shoulder ahead, its emergency flashers pulsing orange in the darkness. Ellie instinctively slowed her car, peering through the storm to assess the situation. It appeared to be a dark SUV, and she could make out a figure standing beside it, illuminated occasionally by the rhythmic blink of the hazard lights. Every instinct told her to keep driving. She was alone on a deserted road in the middle of the night. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to call for help once she reached the next town. She could report the stranded motorist to the highway patrol and let them handle it. But the nurse in her, the part that had sworn to help those in need, couldn't reconcile simply driving past. What if the person was injured? What if they had no cell service, as was common in these rural stretches? What if no one else came along for hours? With a silent prayer that she wasn't making a terrible mistake, Ellie guided her Civic onto the shoulder about 20 feet behind the SUV. She kept her engine running and her headlights on, illuminating the scene partially. She reached for her phone, checking that it had signal. It didn't, just as she had feared, and slipped it into her pocket. Then she grabbed the small canister of pepper spray she kept in her center console, concealing it in her palm as she opened the door. The rain immediately soaked through her scrubs as she stepped out, the wind cutting through the thin fabric. She approached cautiously, calling out as she drew nearer. "Hello, do you need help?" The figure turned toward her. A man, she could now see, perhaps in his 50s, with graying hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. He wore what appeared to be an expensive but now thoroughly drenched suit, and his posture suggested both relief and wariness at her approach. "Oh, thank goodness," he replied, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't immediately place. "I've been stranded for almost an hour. No cell service and my satellite phone's battery died." Ellie kept a cautious distance, her hand still firmly wrapped around the pepper spray. "What happened? Are you injured?" The man gestured toward the rear tire of his SUV. "Blowout. I have a spare, but I've never actually changed a tire before." He gave a self-deprecating laugh that somehow eased Ellie's tension slightly. "Ridiculous, I know. A man my age should know these things." Approaching the vehicle, Ellie could now see the shredded remains of the tire. It hadn't been a simple puncture. The rubber was torn apart, as if the SUV had run over something sharp at high speed. "I'm Ellie," she offered, making a decision. "I can help you change it. I had to learn when I was 16 because my car broke down about once a month." Relief washed over the man's face. "Mikhail," he responded, extending a hand which Ellie shook briefly. "I cannot express how grateful I am. I was beginning to think I might have to spend the night here." Something about his demeanor, a certain dignity despite his bedraggled appearance, made Ellie relax her grip on the pepper spray, though she kept it within easy reach as they worked together to locate the spare tire and jack in the SUV's cargo area. The rain continued to pour as Ellie walked Mikhail through the process of changing the tire. Despite his initial claim of complete ignorance, he proved to be a quick study, asking intelligent questions and following her instructions with precision. Within 20 minutes they had the spare tire securely in place, both of them completely soaked and mud-splattered. "There," Ellie said, stepping back to survey their work. "That should get you to the next town at least. The spare isn't meant for long distances though, you'll want to get a proper replacement as soon as possible." Mikhail nodded, studying the temporary tire. "I cannot thank you enough, Ellie. Most people would have driven past. Why did you stop?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm a nurse," she answered simply, as if that explained everything. And in a way it did. I couldn't just leave someone who might need help. A curious expression crossed Mikhail's face, something like respect mingled with sadness. "The world needs more people like you," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then, more briskly, "Please, let me give you something for your trouble. You've saved me from a very uncomfortable night." He reached for his wallet, but Ellie shook her head firmly. "No, really. I'm happy to help. Pay it forward sometime." Mikhail seemed about to insist, then nodded in acquiescence. "At least take my card. If you ever need anything at all, please do not hesitate to call." He extended a simple white business card. In the poor light, Ellie could make out only a name, Mikhail Petrov, and a phone number with an international prefix. No company name, no title, no email address. It struck her as odd, but she accepted the card to be polite, tucking it into her pocket without much thought. "Drive safely," she said, backing toward her car, "and get that tire replaced first thing tomorrow." "I will," Mikhail promised. "And Ellie, thank you again. Your kindness will not be forgotten." There was something in his tone, a weight, a significance, that momentarily gave her pause, but exhaustion was catching up with her, and all she wanted now was to get home to her warm apartment, and Milo's indignant but affectionate greeting. By the time Ellie finally arrived home, it was nearly 3 in the morning. She barely managed to change out of her wet clothes before collapsing into bed, Mikhail Petrov and his strange manner already fading from her thoughts, as sleep claimed her. Her alarm jolted her awake at 11, far too soon, but necessary given her afternoon shift. Milo was curled against her side, purring contentedly. Ellie allowed herself 5 more minutes of rest before dragging herself to the kitchen to make coffee. As the machine gurgled to life, she flipped on the small television that sat on her counter, more for background noise than any real interest in the programming. The news was on, something about a developing international situation. Ellie paid it little mind, focusing instead on preparing breakfast and reviewing her schedule for the day. It wasn't until the word assassination cut through her morning fog that she looked up at the screen with sudden attentiveness. A somber news anchor was speaking over footage of what appeared to be a diplomatic convoy. Attempted assassination of Russian diplomat Mikhail Petrov as he traveled to peace negotiations. Sources say Petrov's vehicle was sabotaged by unknown assailants, but he managed to escape unharmed and reach the summit via an alternate route. The treaty, potentially ending 5 years of conflict, was successfully signed this morning. In a statement, Petrov credited an anonymous American guardian angel with saving both his life and the peace process. The coffee mug slipped from Ellie's fingers, shattering on the tile floor. Milo darted under the couch in alarm as she stood frozen, staring at the image now on the screen. A dignified man in a formal suit, speaking at a podium flanked by flags. Mikhail Petrov, the man from the road. "This can't be happening," she whispered to her empty apartment. The news had moved on to other stories, but Ellie remained fixed in place, her mind racing to process what she had just learned. She had helped change a tire for a Russian diplomat. A diplomat whose vehicle had been sabotaged. A diplomat who was now crediting her with saving his life. With shaking hands, she retrieved her scrubs from the bathroom floor where she had left them the night before. In the pocket, she found the now damp business card Mikhail had given her. The name matched, as did the face from the television. It wasn't a mistake or a coincidence. Ellie sank onto her couch, trying to calm her racing heart. Nothing about her life had changed, she reasoned. She had simply helped someone in need, as she would have done for anyone. The fact that he was an important diplomat didn't change anything. By tomorrow, this would be old news, and her anonymous contribution would remain just that. Anonymous. She was still reassuring herself as she arrived at the hospital for her shift, deliberately pushing the morning's revelation to the back of her mind. Patients needed her focus, not distraction over an unlikely encounter that was already receding into the past. The shift proceeded normally for the first few hours. Ellie moved from room to room, checking vitals, administering medications, offering comfort and reassurance to those in her care. It wasn't until her dinner break that she noticed something unusual. A black SUV had parked directly in her line of sight from the hospital cafeteria window. As she watched, two men in dark suits emerged and stood beside the vehicle, their postures suggesting they were waiting for something, or someone. A chill ran down Ellie's spine. She told herself she was being paranoid, that the men had nothing to do with her. But as she returned to the nurse's station after her break, the head nurse intercepted her with an odd expression. "Ellie, there are some people here asking for you. They say it's important." She lowered her voice. "They look like government types. Is everything okay?" Before Ellie could respond, she saw them, the men from the SUV, now standing at the end of the corridor, speaking with the hospital administrator. One of them made eye contact with her, and she knew with certainty that they had come for her. "I need to take my break now," Ellie said, already backing away. "But you just had your—" the head nurse began. "Please," Ellie cut her off. "Cover for me. Just for 10 minutes. I'll explain later." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked briskly toward the emergency stairs, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure why she was running, only that something about those men and their presence had triggered a profound fight-or-flight response. She needed time to think, to understand what was happening. She exited through a side door of the hospital, intending to circle around to her car, but stopped short at the sight of another black SUV parked nearby. This wasn't paranoia. She was being watched. But why? What did they want with a nurse who had simply changed a tire? Retreating back into the hospital, Ellie found a quiet supply closet and pulled out her phone. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number on Mikhail's card. It rang 4 times before connecting. "Yes," a cautious voice answered. Not Mikhail's. "I need to speak with Mikhail Petrova," Ellie said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He gave me this number last night when I helped him change a tire." A pause, then, "Your name, please." "Ellie Morgan." Another pause, longer this time. Ellie could hear muffled voices in the background, then Mikhail's accented English came through clearly. "Ellie, I wondered if I might hear from you. I owe you an explanation." "There are men looking for me at the hospital," she said without preamble. "Black SUVs. Men in suits. What's going on?" Mikhail sighed heavily. "I am sorry about that. They are my security detail. After what happened yesterday, they are being overprotective. I told them I wanted to thank you personally, but perhaps they have been overzealous in locating you." "How did they even find me?" Ellie demanded, her fear giving way to indignation. "Your license plate," Mikhail admitted. "Again, I apologize for the intrusion. If you wish, I can call them off immediately." Ellie closed her eyes, leaning against the supply shelves. "Yes, please. I'm just a nurse who stopped to help someone. I don't want to be involved in whatever this is." "Of course," Mikhail agreed readily. "They will leave at once. But Ellie, what you did was not just anything. The tire that blew out on my vehicle was sabotaged. Had I been stranded there much longer, those responsible would likely have returned to finish what they started. Your intervention quite literally saved my life, and, by extension, a peace treaty that will save thousands of lives." The weight of his words settled over Ellie like a physical presence. "I had no idea," she whispered. "How could you?" Mikhail's tone was gentle. "You simply saw someone who needed help and you acted with compassion. It is a rare quality in this world of ours." Ellie was silent for a moment, processing. So what happens now? Now, nothing, if that is what you wish. My security team will withdraw and you can return to your life. You have my word. But, he hesitated, I would still like to express my gratitude if you would permit it. I don't need a reward, Ellie insisted automatically. Not a reward, Mikhail corrected. A thank you, nothing more. Would you be willing to meet me in a public place of your choosing, with no security present, simply to allow me this small courtesy? Everything in Ellie's rational mind told her to refuse, to end this strange interlude and return to her normal life. But something in Mikhail's sincere tone, combined with the realization of what might have happened had she not stopped last night, swayed her. Okay, she agreed reluctantly. There's a coffee shop across from the hospital, Rose's Cafe. I finish my shift at 7. 7:30 at Rose's, Mikhail confirmed. Just me, you have my word. True to his promise, the men in suits disappeared from the hospital corridor within minutes of their call. Ellie completed her shift in a daze, half convinced she had imagined the entire episode. But as she crossed the street to Rose's at 7:15, she spotted Mikhail immediately, sitting alone at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee already waiting. He rose as she approached, extending his hand with a warm smile. Thank you for coming, Ellie. I'm still not entirely sure why I did, she admitted, taking the seat across from him. Mikhail's expression grew serious. I owe you my life. Where I come from, such a debt is sacred. For the next hour, Mikhail explained the significance of the peace treaty he had been traveling to sign, an agreement ending years of border disputes that had claimed thousands of lives. He spoke of the opposition to the treaty, the threats he had received, and the significance of its successful signing earlier that day. Your simple act of kindness may have changed the course of history, he concluded, and not a single person knows it was you. Ellie shifted uncomfortably under the weight of his gratitude. I just changed a tire. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't, Mikhail pointed out gently. You were the only one who stopped, and I find myself wondering about the life of this extraordinary person who, without a moment's hesitation, helps strangers on deserted roads in the middle of the night. Perhaps it was the sincere interest in his eyes, or simply the release of tension after a bizarre 24 hours, but Ellie found herself opening up about her own life, her struggles with student debt, the long commute, the endless overtime shifts, her dreams of eventually working in pediatric oncology. Mikhail listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions. When she finished, he sat in contemplative silence for a moment. You know, he said finally, there are scholarships, international exchange programs for nursing specialists willing to work abroad for a time, programs that include complete loan forgiveness. Ellie raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting I leave the country? Mikhail laughed. Not permanently, but perhaps for a year or two. There is a children's hospital in Geneva, one that specializes in pediatric cancer treatment for refugees. They participate in such a program. He slid a folder across the table that she hadn't noticed before. The application deadline is next month. Should you decide to apply, I would be honored to provide a recommendation. Ellie stared at the folder, speechless. Pediatric oncology. Loan forgiveness. It was everything she had been working toward, packaged as an opportunity, rather than a reward. I don't know what to say, she managed finally. Say you'll consider it, Mikhail replied simply. That is all I ask. Their conversation concluded with Mikhail's promise that she would hear nothing more from his security team. He thanked her once more and departed, leaving Ellie sitting alone with the folder and a head spinning with possibilities. She returned to her apartment that night half expecting to find more men in black suits waiting for her, but the building was quiet and normal. Milo greeted her with his usual demanding meow, completely unimpressed by her extraordinary day. As she prepared for bed, Ellie examined the folder's contents more carefully. The program was legitimate, prestigious even, the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime, if at all. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the stormy night that had set these events in motion. Ellie had the day off, and she used it to research the Geneva program extensively. Everything checked out. By afternoon she had started filling out the application, a sense of nervous excitement building within her. She was so absorbed in the paperwork that she almost didn't register the sound at first, a rhythmic thumping that seemed to make the windows vibrate. It grew louder, more insistent, until she could no longer ignore it. Setting aside the application, she moved to her small balcony and looked up. The sky above her apartment complex was filled with helicopters, at least 6 of them, circling in a coordinated pattern. They were military-gray machines, their sleek black bodies emblazoned with official insignia she couldn't quite make out from this distance. As she watched in stunned disbelief, one of them broke from the formation and descended toward the park across from her building. Ellie's phone rang, startling her. The caller ID showed an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Miss Morgan," a crisp professional voice responded. "This is Special Agent Wilson with Diplomatic Security. We need you to remain in your apartment. Someone will be coming to escort you shortly." "Why? Why?" Ellie demanded, her momentary calm shattering. "I was told there would be no more—" "This isn't about Mr. Petrov," the agent cut her off. "Or rather, not directly. There's been a development. Please, just stay where you are. All will be explained when our team arrives." The line went dead before she could ask any more questions. Ellie stood frozen on her balcony, watching as another helicopter broke formation and landed in the park. People were emerging from the first one, moving with military precision. This wasn't a Russian security detail, these were American government agents. 15 minutes later, a sharp knock at her door announced their arrival. Through the peephole, Ellie could see 3 people, 2 men in dark suits flanking a woman in a navy blue pantsuit, her posture radiating authority. With a deep breath, Ellie opened the door. "Ms. Morgan," the woman greeted her, presenting credentials that identified her as Special Agent Diana Hayes, U.S. Department of State. "May we come in? We have much to discuss and little time." Numbly, Ellie stepped aside to admit them. Agent Hayes moved directly to Ellie's small dining table, setting down a sleek laptop while the other agents performed a quick sweep of the apartment, much to Milo's evident displeasure. "Miss Morgan, I understand you've had an unusual couple of days," Agent Hayes began, her tone businesslike but not unkind. "What you may not realize is just how significant your actions have been." She opened the laptop and turned it to face Ellie. On the screen was a news broadcast, this one showing scenes of celebration in what appeared to be Eastern European cities. People filled the streets, many of them in tears embracing soldiers who were laying down weapons. "The treaty that Mikhail Petrov signed yesterday has ended a conflict that has been simmering for decades and actively killing people for the last 5 years, Agent Hayes explained. "It's being called the Miracle of Geneva. 3 previous attempts at similar agreements have failed. This one succeeded, largely because Petrov personally championed it against considerable opposition within his own government." Ellie nodded slowly. "He explained some of this to me yesterday." "What he might not have told you," Agent Hayes continued, "is that the sabotage of his vehicle wasn't the work of rogue elements or terrorists. Our intelligence strongly suggests it was orchestrated by hardliners within his own diplomatic corps, people who wanted the conflict to continue and were willing to assassinate one of their own to prevent peace." The implication sent a chill through Ellie. "So when I helped him—" "You unknowingly inserted yourself into an international intelligence operation," Agent Hayes confirmed. "One with far-reaching consequences. That tire wasn't meant to strand him. It was meant to force his vehicle off the road at high speed. Had you not stopped to help, he would have continued driving on the sabotaged wheel until catastrophic failure occurred." Ellie sank into a chair, struggling to process this information. "But why are you here now, with helicopters no less? What's happening?" Agent Hayes exchanged glances with her colleagues before answering. "This morning Petrov publicly credited you, by name, with saving both his life and the peace process. He called you a hero, deserving of the highest honors from both our nations." "He what?" Ellie's voice rose in disbelief. "But he promised. He said no one would know it was me." "It appears the decision was made for him," Agent Hayes replied grimly. "The same internal factions that tried to assassinate him leaked your identity to the press, presumably hoping to create a diplomatic incident, or possibly to make you a target. The room seemed to tilt around Ellie as the full impact of these words registered. A target? Am I in danger? Potentially, Agent Hayes acknowledged. Which is why we're here. The President has authorized immediate protective custody for you while we assess the threat level and determine next steps. Protective custody? Ellie repeated numbly. For how long? That depends on how the situation develops, but I should tell you that the President is also on her way to personally thank you for your service to international peace. That's why the helicopters are here. Presidential Security Advance Team. Ellie stared at her in disbelief. The President is coming here? To my apartment? Agent Hayes allowed herself a small smile. No, Ms. Morgan. The President is waiting to meet you at a secure location. That's where we'll be taking you. You have 15 minutes to pack what you need for a few days. Is there someone who can look after your cat? As if in a dream, Ellie found herself nodding. My neighbor, Mrs. Geller. She watches Milo when I work doubles. Good. Agent Reeves will arrange that while you pack. Agent Hayes checked her watch. 14 minutes now, Ms. Morgan. In a daze, Ellie threw essential items into a small suitcase, clothes, toiletries, her nursing credentials, the folder about the Geneva program. Within the allotted time, she was being escorted from her apartment building through a side exit where an armored SUV waited with its engine running. As they pulled away, she looked back to see more vehicles and personnel arriving, securing the perimeter of what had until today been an unremarkable apartment complex in an unremarkable neighborhood. The SUV joined a convoy that wound through the city to a helipad where one of the black helicopters waited, rotors already turning. Before she quite knew what was happening, Ellie was aboard and airborne, the city falling away beneath them as they climbed into the clear blue sky. Agent Hayes sat beside her, speaking into a secured headset. Package is en route, ETA 20 minutes. Turning to Ellie, she added, After you meet with the President, we'll be transferring you to a safe house until things settle down. It should only be a few days, a week at most. Ellie gazed out the window at the landscape passing below, the same roads she had driven countless times, now looking small and distant from this new perspective. 24 hours ago she had been a nurse with crushing debt and modest dreams. Now she was flying in a government helicopter to meet the President after inadvertently helping to end an international conflict, all because she had stopped to help a stranger change a tire in the rain. The helicopter banked gently, joining others in formation as they approached what appeared to be a private airfield. On the ground, Ellie could see the distinctive shape of Air Force One and a flurry of activity surrounding it. The scene was surreal, cinematic in its gravity and scale. As they began their descent, Agent Hayes placed a hand on Ellie's arm. For what it's worth, Ms. Morgan, what you did, stopping to help when others wouldn't, it matters, more than you could have known. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the world. Ellie thought of Mikhail standing by his disabled SUV in the pouring rain, of the simple decision she had made to pull over, of all that had followed from that one moment of compassion. She thought of the celebrating people on Agent Hayes' laptop screen, of peace breaking out after years of conflict, of lives saved by the treaty that might never have been signed. I'm just a nurse, she said softly, more to herself than to Agent Hayes. I just did what anyone would do. Agent Hayes smiled. That's the thing about heroes, Ms. Morgan. They never see themselves that way. They just do what's right, even when it's hard or inconvenient or dangerous. And sometimes, just sometimes, that changes everything. The helicopter touched down on the tarmac, its rotors slowing as a line of officials in formal attire approached. Through the window, Ellie could see the presidential seal on a podium that had been set up nearby, flags snapping in the breeze created by the still-spinning rotors of the surrounding aircraft. Ready? Agent Hayes asked as the door slid open, revealing a world Ellie could never have imagined entering. A world of high diplomacy and international intrigue, a world she had accessed through a single act of roadside assistance. Ellie took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and nodded. As she stepped from the helicopter onto the tarmac, the sky above filled with more arriving aircraft, news helicopters now, drawn by the unfolding story of an ordinary nurse who had unknowingly changed the course of history with one simple choice. Sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the most ordinary decisions. Sometimes, stopping to help a stranger on a rainy night can set in motion events that echo around the world. And sometimes, 24 hours is all it takes for helicopters to fill the sky, heralding a new chapter in a life forever changed by the power of kindness. Small acts of compassion can move mountains.